So I wanted to begin by saying that since I've graduated with my master's degree in theology, it is incredibly hard to find a job. So I've decided to go through the Bible chapter by chapter and just try to explain what everything means in the most simplistic terms. So covering the Bible from front to back should be a pretty good exercise in faith and helping others grow closer to faith. I think it'll be very insightful to my understanding of the Bible, and perhaps I'll get some comments and feedback from people who had a lot of questions, curiosity answered, which is great. I want to begin also by saying that even though I'm a master in theology, I'm literally nothing. We have to focus on humility, and that's one of the biggest things I'd like to start with, being humble. Those who think they are something just because they have a degree is it's not going to work out, especially in Christianity's worldview, as the one who is brought low will be brought high. In many verses, the Bible reinforces the notion that it turns this world on its head. So I want to say that this is going to be like a big series talking about each chapter in the Bible. You could consider this a sermon, but it's probably more akin to a Bible study, but not necessarily, because we're not technically studying the Bible. It's just me talking to you, so it's more sermon-like, and the feedback would be coming later in the comment form. It's not direct at the same time. So, with all that said, each sermon here is going to be very plain, and there's not going to be a lot going on the screen. Just more of the background aesthetics to make it look like it should be a church of some kind. Maybe some depictions, Christianity, architecture, culture, things like that. So you can just tune out and just listen to the chapter reading itself. Let's begin. I want to start off by saying that I'm using the King James Version, but really you can use any version. There's very little difference between the versions and the wording. It all comes down to semantics, but if there's a big deal between the wording, someone can feel free to leave it in the comments down below and it will be addressed, okay? So the next reading won't be so long-winded in the beginning. This is just putting out the information that's necessary for the rest of the series. So yeah, let's just get into it. So we're going to begin with Genesis chapter 1, of course, and I want to start with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So this presents many questions and ideas. So God created heaven and earth, right? And a lot of people will say, well, God lives in heaven, right? So where did he live before he created heaven? And that's a good question. Was there anything there before he created heaven? Is heaven in reference to the skies, or is the wordplay being used here the heavens, which would translate to something more similar to the skies from the Greek and Romans and Hebrews, and many people from thousands of years ago consider the sky to be the heavens. They wouldn't just point up and say that's the sky. So we have to understand that behind these words, there's very importance. I understand that I literally just got done saying that. Words are nuanced a lot of the time, and it really doesn't matter as long as you get the core meaning. The core meaning here is that God created earth and heaven could be something similar to where the angels lived and where God lives now, or the heavens could be just the sky that is separated from earth. If you created earth and there was just nothing but darkness, you would need something to separate it. Otherwise, it would just be a ball in darkness. But the next verse will clear this up, and it says in chapter 1, verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So, this is interesting because the word usage here is kind of unique. It says the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. I'm not particularly sure what would be occurring there. The use of the term deep often is in reference to water, meaning deep water. But what would separate deep water from shallow water is not only being able to not be able to stand in it, which is what most people would consider to be the difference between deep and shallow. But if you attempt to look in deep water, you'll note that you can't see through it. So it's very, very dark. And it also is reinforced with the idea that it was without form and void. So, but didn't God just create earth in the first verse? He created the heaven and the earth, literally says that. So at this point in time, we don't know what earth actually was yet. It was without form. So many people think that God just created a ball of dirt and it advanced from there. But in fact, he actually just created a giant sphere of water, which reinforces the notion that the water in our solar system may only be the water that exists in any type of universe, because it is the building blocks for creation. So if anything else existed, it would more than likely need water. And this just, again, reinforces that notion that without water, almost nothing can survive or be created initially, even if it doesn't require water after creation. So let's move on. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is a unique verse because it speaks to the idea that God is now creating with words. So the first verse, God created heaven and earth, but it didn't say how. It didn't say, did God wrap his hands around a sphere object in his hands and imagine it, and poof, it was there. Did God send the Spirit to create the earth as he did with the waters? No, it doesn't say that. It says he said, "Let there be light," which gives credence and power to God's word. So already in the third verse, we have God creating heaven and earth, separating the two. We now also have the Spirit of God moving upon the waters himself, which likely is in reference to creation. And then now he speaks and creates light, something else that is a core component for things to be created. A lot of things need light to live, from seeds to animals to humanity, to bacteria to viruses. Many things require a certain amount of light to survive and be created. And God saw the light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So another verse that goes unquestioned is, a lot of people say, well, God just said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and boom, now we have like the sun, right? He created the sun. But that isn't true. That's not what this says. Have a look-see here. God said he said the light was good and divided the light from the darkness, which means that the light and the darkness was entangled. It seems impossible, like the way man's knowledge is of physics and this universe's laws is that you can't have light without casting some kind of shadow in some type of way. So if you filled a room with light, you would have nothing but light, okay? That makes sense. But what's outside that room? What's beyond those walls? Is that more light, or is the room containing the light and the rest is shadow? So God is setting up that light and dark will be divided. It divides the darkness and keeps the darkness away. And God called light day, and he called darkness night. And evening and the morning were the first day. So now we're getting a bit more of an explanation, and we're understanding that God actually created the concept of time. Many people say the concept of time is relative, and really only relative to man as its concept for aging and death. But that's technically untrue, because in verse 5, we're getting the understanding and the idea that God actually called light day and darkness night, which is similar to our understanding of when the sun rises and when the sun sets, which means God could have created the sun, which, again, maybe when he said, let there be light, there was the sun, but then the sun would cast shadow, which would divide the light from the darkness, but God then had to divide the light from the darkness. So there's a lot to unpack here, and the point is that God created what we know as morning and evening, and night and day, and the cycles of time. Obviously, this is necessary for creation as well, because many things sleep. Even if we had an absolute perfect world, there would still be need for things like sleep and food and all of that, unless it was rewritten. The laws of the universe were rewritten that things did not require sleep to reset themselves, or food, or whatever. Again, all of this is going into the need for creation. So we're moving on to verse 6, and God said, let there be firmament in the midst of water, and let it divide the waters from the waters. So I'm going to go ahead and look up firmament and just give you the exact definition, because that's really important to understand that. So this is considered the heavens or the sky, especially regarded as a tangible thing. It's like the ozone layer, maybe, perhaps. It's a sphere or world viewed as a collection of people. So that's the definition here. Unfortunately, it's not exactly the best definition, but basically it's reinforcing the idea that God created the world, and the world is a circle, a sphere of some kind. And that is the shape that Earth is going to take. Even though there was a shape, this is something which is supposed to divide the waters. Perhaps this was the creation of lands and dirt and things like that to prevent the waters from being together. It's just the way that it's worded that's very, very odd. Why would I want to divide waters from water? Well, maybe I'm just making some land. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. Again, unpacking this, it's a good question. It seems that it's more referencing the spherical, that there is a sphere of water that was surrounding Earth at this time, kind of, again, for creation's sake. And then there's a sphere of water inside the sphere of water, and that's what it's trying to reference here. And so we're going to understand just exactly what the heavens are, because it is referenced in verse 8. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So this is day 2, and God is clarifying. So if we return back up to verse 1, God created heaven and the earth. And here now he is calling the firmament that surrounds earth heaven. Now we know that we have gone to the moon, and there are some deniers out there. There are some conspiracy theorists who say we haven't gone to the moon, and yet there are several countries that have gone to the moon. There's people who have gone to space, privately paid on jets and things like that, millions of dollars, and you've seen these rockets go into the sky, and they have been to the heavens, but that is not the heaven that we are described in the Bible. Not to get ahead of myself, because in the future we're going to be talking about the Bible and its interpretable version of heaven, but it's like, the streets of gold, the many mansions, God up there with all the angels. And if you go into a rocket ship and you go up into the heavens, that's definitely not what heaven is. So I believe the wording here is heaven being used for multiple things. We can look to the sky and we can say, hey, those are the heavens, because they are up high. And we could look at the moon, and we wouldn't say that was the heavens, right? We would say that's the moon. But if we would look at the sun, we wouldn't say that's the heavens either. We would say that's the sun. But many people say when you die, you go to heaven, which is a place up high. So it is just unique word usage, and it's interesting that it is attributed to this. obviously is being used in the terminology that there is a massive sphere around Earth that people can't just jump and touch. You can't just go up to it. It's way high. And a lot of people believe it to be like the ozone layer, which protects Earth from atmospheric radiation and a lot of other bad stuff. Again, a very necessary component for creation. So we're going to move on to verse 9. This is the second day again, and we're moving forward. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear," and it was so. So once again, clarifying, the firmament was not dry land, but this is dry land, where God is very specific, stating that this is dry land. Dry land has appeared. God has created it. And the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, which it seems like God has created dry land from water. I'm not particularly sure how he did that, and it's not really described how to do that, and I don't know a lot of scientists who can magically poof dirt out of air or change water into dirt. But there you have it. That is something that has occurred. That's how there is land. That's how there's a core and earth and things like that. And so God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters was called the seas, and God saw that it was good. And so there you have it. God is reshaping earth to the way he sees fit. Now again, you can get lost. You can get very confused here because, when you say earth, you just, you're referencing the dirt, you're referencing the water, you're referencing the ozone layer, this giant sphere. But now we're seeing it in components, we're seeing it in pieces, and it's being pieced out. So it can be very confusing to follow this and understand it exactly. It's very clearly being pieced together by God and changed and altered as he sees fit. So he created the seas out of the water that he gathered together, and he called the dry land itself earth. And again, he saw that it was good. So we'll move on to verse 11 here. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is itself upon the earth." And it was so. So here we go. Again, this seems very straightforward. We're just talking about God creating grass, which is something that needs to be grown on dirt. Otherwise, it's just dirt. And then trees. Trees, but not just trees, not just like trees to look at, not just trees that produce leaves, not just trees that produce pine cones, but trees yielding fruit. But here's something that's interesting. Here in this translation, it says, "after his kind," trees yielding fruit after his kind. But his is not capitalized to indicate that it is God speaking here. So maybe that is a typo in this version of the Bible. Regardless, if it is after his kind, that would indicate that God did come from something and came from somewhere. God may be omniscient and all creative and perfect, but that is not to say that God didn't come from something or somewhere either. There could be a multitude of God and multiverses and things like that, things we just don't know about and can't know about right now. So after God has created all of this, he ends with, "it was so," which means it just happened. That is what occurred. So this is being explained, and this is what occurred. So we're going to move on to verse 12. "And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind," again, and it's not capitalized again, so that would be a double typo if that's what it is referencing. "And the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good." I believe the his kind is referencing the previous statement, herb yielding seed, which would be after his kind, his being the herb yielding the seed, and again, the tree yielding fruit, whose seed is in itself after his kind being the fruit tree. So a lot of wordplay here. Interesting. After all of this occurred, God saw that it was good. It wasn't just so. God noticed that this was a good thing. God is now creating. God says this is good. We should be doing this. So let's continue. And the evening and the morning were the third day. That is verse 13. So now we have 3 days. Earth has been separated into seas. It now has dirt. It now has grass. It now has trees. We don't know how big. We don't know how massive. Perhaps it's the same size that we have today. Perhaps it's all one giant piece of land like Pangea. Perhaps it is a multitude of different things. So, we're going to move on here. Verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And so, once again, I just want to note that, as I said before, God created the concept of time, and here in verse 14, that is very much reinforced, where God has decided to bring the light to earth and divide the day from night. So before, it likely was just consistently day, and there wasn't any night hitting earth because of the firmament. The firmament was preventing a lot of things from the outside universe from getting into the earth. That is what it's there for. It's a giant shield. And God decided to bring forth the light and night cycle into earth and see what would occur, how it would affect things. And again, he understands the concept of signs, seasons, and days and years. This is very interesting. This is very unique. Because if we are to believe that the Garden of Eden was a perfect world for man, and everything was going to be just absolutely perfect, then we should note that in verse 14, we not only have seasons, but we have day and night cycle. Now, why would we need a day and night cycle if there is perfection? I am not saying that there isn't perfection that could exist with a day and night cycle. I am only noting that a lot of people's perception of perfection is unique and interesting, and it does not take into context verse 14. But let's move forward. Verse 15, we're going to jump right into that. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And again, it's just stating, hey, God did this, and so it happened. Verse 16, and God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. This is likely in reference to God creating the sun, the moon, and the stars. So imagine you have the earth surrounded by a ball of water, and you now have some light coming through to the earth, but God says there's nothing around it. It's all darkness, so we're going to make some stars here to light the way a little bit. And you know what? I'm going to make the sun, and I'm going to make the moon, which means that we're going to have a little bit of light at night as well. It's not going to be fully lit. It's going to shine from the sun itself. So the sun is the greater light, which rules the day, and the moon is the lesser light, which takes the light from the sun. And so there you have it. God explains that he created light before the sun itself. So what was light beforehand? It was not sunlight, that's for sure. Verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. This just explains why God created the sun, the moon, and the stars, and it was to give light to the earth instead of just constantly having a light and night cycle. Now there are things that rule over light and the night. Verse 18, and to rule over day and over night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good. Again, reinforcing what I just said. God could have created just light and night, just randomly, taking place, and no rulers. But in this case, he decided to put the sun and the moon in charge of the day and the night. And in the evening and the morning were the fourth day. That is verse 19, which means we are on day 4, ladies and gentlemen. Day 4. In 4 days, we have a giant sphere of water existing in the universe with stars, the sun, the moon. There is ground, there is grass, there are fruit trees, and there are seas. And everything is looking good. Verse 20, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. This, again, is starting to take shape where we're getting creatures that can swim and birds that can fly. But more importantly, it states the open firmament of heaven. So again, referencing those heavens, the firmament in the sky, the clouds, which comprise a lot of water, the birds can fly through them. Verse 21, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, it's very interesting how the use of their and his are being used here. But the waters would not be attributed to a male, which is why their kind is used instead of his kind. So his would indicate a father. Perhaps the winged fowl would be the father of all birds' creation. And all birds would descend from the winged fowl. And again, God creating the great whales and every living creature that moveth in the waters. And so God said, this is great, doing good. Verse 22, and God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply on earth. So God's just saying, hey, fill up the earth, man. There's a lot of it. I need you to go ahead and get busy, so that we can fill this place up. Verse 23, and the evening and the morning were the 5th day, which day 5, now we have the earth inhabited by creatures. So we're on verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the creature after his kind, cattle, and the creeping thing, the beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so, God creating cattle-type creatures, creeping things, again, could be vines and things of that nature, other than fruit trees, other than grass. Nothing special here. God's just creating more animals and creatures. Verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all of earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth. And so, this is the biggest one. This is the origin story of man. Verse 26, God is making man in our image. Who is God talking to here? That is the question. A lot of people assume it's angels, but is he talking to angels, or is he talking to more gods like him in other universes? Who is our? That is the question. Why would he not say, in my likeness? I will make man in my likeness would be the correct pronunciation here. I wouldn't say, hey, let us make some clay statues in our likeness when I was alone. I would say, I'm going to make some clay statues that look like me. So it's interesting, but it is not expanded upon. The point is that he is creating man, a creature that is like God, that is like whomever God is speaking with or speaking to, and we have the power over all of the other creatures. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image, and the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. This is just wordplay to explain that God created man and female, which makes sense. It's not really a surprise. We have the story of Adam and Eve, but that will be later on. God created male and females. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And basically just reinforcing the idea of what was happening in 26 when he was making man in his image, in our image, quote unquote. And so God is telling them to be fruitful and multiply on earth. He wants there to be lots of people on earth. And God blessed them. That is something that the other creatures did not receive at the time, which is unique and interesting as well, because God created those creatures, yet he did not choose to bless them. Verse 29, And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you shall be for meat. And God is talking about the need for eating. This is kind of strange because, again, perfection. Why would creatures need to eat if we're in a perfect world? God noted and used the word meat here, which is something that would be necessary for life. You do not survive on bread and bread alone. We all know that. A lot of people need meat. They need protein to survive. Very few people in the world can just survive without protein, period. So, one other thing that should be noted in this verse is that there is more than one. So, there's not just one grass seed. He specifies that there are herbs bearing seed, which is upon all of the earth, every herb that there is, and every fruit tree that yields any type of seed or fruit. Again, it's not just one, it is implied that it is multiple here. Verse 30, And to every beast on the earth, and every fowl in the air, and everything that creepeth on the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And again, it reinforces the idea that these creatures need to eat, and this is why God gave grass for them to eat. And then if we move on to verse 31, the concluding verse of chapter 1, And God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And in the evening and the morning on the 6th day. And that was day 6. So now we have humans on the earth. We have creatures, birds, we have beasts, we have things in the water, we have grass, we have fruit, we have things creeping, we have dirt, we have seas, we have a giant circle of water around the earth, clouds also, and we have the moon, the stars, and the sun, and we have a light and a moon and a day and night cycle and a morning and an evening cycle. And with that, that concludes the first reading of the chapter. We delved in, we looked at each verse, we analyzed each verse. What did I miss? I would really like your feedback. I would really like your opinion. Again, please note this is the King James version of the Bible. You can use any version, but there will be slight differences in the wording. Remember, the context is most important. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are curious about Christianity, we are starting at the first chapter, but a lot of this probably won't make sense, so I would invite you now to accept Jesus Christ into your heart. Christ died for our sins, and we will get into that way later in the Bible, but there is something known as the cycle of sin. And if we didn't need Jesus, then the Jewish people would have been God's people, and they would have been selected for salvation. They more than likely would be ruling us today in all actuality, and God would be on earth, and everyone who was not born into a Jewish family would not receive salvation, just due to the simple fact that everyone else was filled with sin. And there's a lot to unpack and a lot to explain, but unfortunately all of us were born into sin, and we'll get into that in the next chapter. And I would just invite you to understand that Jesus Christ died for our sins, and you have a ticket to heaven. Consider this: Jesus Christ is our lawyer. So when we are being judged, would you like to stand trial for yourself, or would you like to have a knowledgeable lawyer represent you? Or would you like to just speak to the jury and say, hey, I shouldn't go to hell because see where that takes you? Jesus can be your lawyer in that instance. So please accept Jesus into your heart today and receive salvation, and understand that you will be saved and you will get a number of benefits from that, instant relief from sin being one of them, and perhaps a better life overall. I appreciate you guys tuning into this. My name is Dr. Freedom, and I will be hitting this back up again next week, and I look forward to you guys coming and listening to that sermon as well. I want to thank you all for coming, and God bless.